Good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us for another episode of Library Talk and everything else. I am your host, DJ JC. Hopefully, everybody's doing well this Thursday, October 3rd today.
Yeah.
So I am really excited because I have Mr. John Ferris here joining us in the studio. Good morning, John.
Oh, thanks. Good morning. Well, how you doing this
Doing
morning?
well,
Yeah,
doing all right.
Awesome.
You know, we were walking over here this morning,
Yes.
and the weather is still really hot, even though
Real
we're
hot.
already in
beautiful
October.
though. It's beautiful.
It
morning,
is
though.
really nice, but it's still hot out there.
Little warm,
Yeah.
but tolerable. You know.
Yeah, you know, it is so hot out there. I actually saw a bird pulling a worm out of the ground using oven mitts. I mean, that's how hot it is. So it is so hot. So hopefully everybody's doing well. Hopefully everybody's doing good. So I'm really excited because we have been having, so many wonderful guests on the show. We had Jesus Resendez from the library talking about financial literacy, talking about financial planning, which was a great conversation. Last week we had Mrs. Catherine Autry talking about careers and planning, and a wonderful conversation as well. And today I have Mr. John Ferris because we are going to be talking about the Twilight Zone.
Yeah, the Twilight Zone.
The Twilight Zone television show from 1959 to 1964. Hopefully you're not disconnecting the show because we're we're going to talk about.
Do that.
Yes, please don't do that. No, we're so excited about this conversation. But okay, a couple of things. So why are we talking about this? How did we come to talk about this subject? Why are we talking about it now? Well, it is October, so we wanted to do something spooky. Although the Twilight Zone isn't really that spooky, right, John?
It's spooky. It's just
Fascinating.
fascinating.
It is an interesting show. So we want to talk about that. We're talking about how. This is one of the things that binds us, I guess, as coworkers and as friends, is the fact that we could talk about the Twilight Zone television show. So there were several different iterations, and we're going to talk about those, but we're going to focus on the 1959 to 1964 original series. And so I want to talk to you, John. I want to ask you what your experience, how you came about watching the show, memories about the show, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Last week, if you listened at the tail end of our conversation, I mentioned that we're going to nerd out. We're going to geek out today in this episode. So hopefully you enjoy it. Thank you so much for allowing us the opportunity to spend our Thursday morning with you, and hopefully you're having a wonderful morning. So, John, my question to you is, what and how do you know of the Twilight Zone? I mean, this is way before our time.
Of course.
This is way before our births, but we somehow continue to watch it, and we'll talk about that. But I'm really excited. You can probably tell the sound of my voice that I'm really happy about this topic and excited to have John here. So, John, without further ado, introduce yourself, who you are, and again, how you're here and what the Twilight means to you.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, my name is John Ferris. I'm a research instructional librarian here at the Brownsville Campus Library. Very proud to serve all our students here. And I came across the Twilight Zone from my uncle, who was a big fan of it when it originally came out. So he got to see it for the first time, the first screening of it, the original showing of it. And I saw it when I was in college. And so one of the first ones that caught my attention, kind of captured my interest, was The Seventh is Made Up of Phantoms. I don't know if you remember that one. That was really exciting. That was a really exciting one because it was had the history part of it. Of course, it goes to Custer's Last Stand. I'm not going to ruin it for everybody who wants to take a look and see it for the first time. But it's about Custer's Last Stand, how a time force kind of takes control and takes a group of them into the past. And I was excited by it. It was so much fun. And the plot twist was interesting to me. And the storytelling ability was interesting to me. And so it was a combination of those two together that just kind of attracted me to the show. And it still attracts me to this day. In fact, I bought a couple of collections on DVD. I watched those too. And it was just so fun. It was so curiously interesting how he would weave the plot, the storytelling together, as well as the special effects were nouveau at that time. Of course, it might be old-fashioned now. But they were nouveau then.
Yes, I don't think they stand the test of time.
Not as well as the storytelling, the plot twists do. But still, at least they were trying to go to the next level. They were trying to cross that barrier.
I know, and one of the things that just amazes me is that for those of you that are joining us and wondering what we're talking about, we are again talking about the Twilight Zone series that was created in the late 1950s by Rod Serling.
Serling, yes.
And I know, John, you are big into biographies, and so
Yes.
Rod Serling created this show for CBS, and it's a show that mixes and blends fantasy with science fiction, with with societal issues that were going on, and we're going to talk about that. And I want to look at that because, at its face, it is an anthology show.
Anthology,
But
mhm.
the thing about this particular show is that it goes a lot deeper than just what people think, and that's one of the things that I wanted to ask you.
Mhm.
You know, you hear people and you talk to people, and I have actually, and I'm going to share this a little bit later, some quotes from people that I asked about the Twilight Zone. I wanted to
Okay,
know, what do
okay,
you know
okay.
about the Twilight Zone? And I had some really interesting responses. But one of the things that we hear in society and culture, I've heard it
The
in
culture.
movies, I've
Mhm.
heard it in
Yes,
songs,
yes,
I've
yes.
heard it in different things. There's a song by, I believe, the group Gold Earring, that is called Twilight Zone.
Twilight Zone.
It
Okay,
has
yeah,
nothing to
yeah.
do with the show,
Right.
but it's in the culture, you know. And people say,
Mhm.
"Oh, I think I just stepped into the Twilight Zone. I think we're in the Twilight Zone now." And I've heard it in different movies. I know I'm a big Seinfeld, and I'm gonna talk about Seinfeld a little bit, but I'm a big Seinfeld fan, and there's an episode where he mentions the Twilight Zone. So that cultural reference is always there, you know. Oh, the
Mhm.
Twilight Zone, the Twilight Zone. But what does that mean? I think what happens is that people know about the twist endings, and they know that it's a weird show.
Yeah.
But tell us a little bit more of what you found out when you were investigating your research. When you were doing the research, excuse me, and that's what this whole show is about. Library Talk and everything else is about research. And the research question that we want to look at today is, how does the Twilight Zone utilize science fiction and fantastical elements to explore themes of morality and human nature in the context of societal fears? So Rod Serling, the creator of this, somehow captured that. So John, in your research to prepare for this show, what did you find out about Rod Serling?
Well, his biography in particular is very fascinating. He's a native of Syracuse, New York. He served his country honorably during World War II. He was a combat veteran. He was a paratrooper of all things, and he was a paratrooper of the 11th Airborne Division back then. And then once he finished his service, he drew a lot of his experiences into the Twilight Zone and into his writing, because that was like a big part of his life.
And you see that, John. There are so many episodes that deal with military,
Yes.
that
Mhm.
deal with
Yes, absolutely.
with military science, with military themes,
Yes, of
and
course.
so it's a very interesting. So yes, he was. I believe at the end of his career, at some point, he was an instructor.
Yes, there were two schools that he worked at. He worked at, let me see, he worked at the Antioch College, which is, I believe, in Ohio, and Ithaca College, where he taught film and television.
Yes. So thank you so much, John, for sharing your experience about the Twilight Zone. I'm going to give you how I came about the
ahead.
Twilight Zone, and I'm going to go. People that know me, people that know me know I go a long way to get to a point of a story, but I'll try to make it short. But the way I came about the Twilight Zone was that I had heard about podcasts, but I really didn't follow any podcasts. I really didn't know any. So I started delving during the pandemic. I remember kind of listening to some podcasts, and I discovered a Seinfeld podcast, which is a show that discusses every episode of the show Seinfeld, which I'm a big fan of as well. And in one of those episodes, they discussed another podcast that was actually going to end its run, and that podcast that they were talking about within the Seinfeld podcast was a show via podcast called the Twilight Pwn. Twilight PWN, which I had to look up what that meant. I was like, what does PWN mean? Pwn, to pwn somebody. It means to burn somebody. So they mentioned this podcast, so I said, you know what? I've listened to. I'm sorry. I've watched a couple of Twilight Zone episodes, what I would consider the classics, and so let me take a look at that podcast. I was trying to find some podcasts, so I listened to the Twilight Pwn. And oh my goodness, John, I was hooked. That is
Tell me,
still
yes.
my favorite podcast.
Mhm.
These two individuals discuss every single episode of the Twilight Zone, and
Wow.
it's just an amazing podcast. John, it ended its run several years ago, but I'm still listening to
Oh, of course.
to that
The discussion. is kinda-
discussion because it's so interesting.
Mhm.
And you know, coincidentally, you're here today on the 3rd of October because, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, we wanted to look at spooky things in October.
Mhm.
But the show actually premiered, John, October 2nd, 1959. So yesterday,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So we couldn't have timed it any better.
Mhm.
You know, so a couple of things about the Twilight Zone is that there were, and there have been several iterations of it. There was the first series from 1959 to 1964.
Mhm.
Then the second series ran from 1985 to 89.
Mhm.
The third series ran from 2002 to 2003. And then there's a fourth series that was from 2019 to 2020. And there was also a movie that came out in
Yes,
1983,
there was.
a
That's
very
right. I must tell you
controversial
about that
movie.
movie.
And we're not really going to go into the specifics of that movie, but a very controversial movie because of what happened on the set. And
Yes,
I'll
of
mention
course.
that as we are going through the show, that there was a death of three
There was an
actors
accident.
that occurred. A very famous actor, Vic Morrow,
Monk Moore, yes,
was
yes,
was
yes.
died in that accident,
Right.
and so it brought about a lot of controversy. Steven Spielberg was attached to it. He wasn't directing that particular part of the movie, but yeah, so it caused some controversy, and yeah, so there's been different iterations, but again, we're going to focus on the 1959-64. But you think about the show, and it covers a variety of topics, including paranoia, Cold War paranoia, discrimination, racism,
Yeah.
all again blended in this fantastical type of show.
Yes.
And although they're not giving you the direct message, but they do leave you with the message in some of the episodes.
Yes, they do.
And not every episode is a winner. There are some episodes that are not
He
very good.
admitted himself in an interview. He said, "It's not every show was a winner to him or just hit out of the park, shot out of the park." But he was very thoughtful. I mean, he asked deep existential questions. He explored complex moral philosophy, like where is everybody? That was an interesting one. And the midnight sun, the ecological calamity. Even though it was just a fever, we all kind of saw that. Oh, the sun's getting hotter and hotter. Could that possibly happen in real life? Yes, it could. And they're exploring all those. He explored all of these type of subjects so beautifully.
He did, and his writing is very unique.
Yes.
His writing is very unique. Now, again, this is dated, obviously,
Yes, of
1959 to
course, of course.
1964. And what happened was that it premiered in 1959 and ran through 3 seasons until it was canceled. It was canceled after the 3rd season, and CBS decided to do away with the show. But then what would have been their 4th season, they brought them back because they ended up having to cancel a show called Nurses. And so now what they needed to do was they needed to fill in 2 30-minute slots. So they took the 30-minute format, they extended it to cover an hour's worth of television. So now season 4 is an hour-long episode, hour-long episodes. Which, I don't know what you think, John, but I think for me, the 30-minute episodes seem to work a little better.
But to you, I can see it because it was amazing how he was able to squeeze all that in so brilliantly in the amount of time. If you give him more time, maybe he could have done even more. But I could see how that would work.
Oftentimes, the 4th season is criticized because there's a lot of padding in it.
Padding,
The
okay.
conversations are a little longer, the
okay,
effects are a
yeah.
little more because,
course,
again,
I
they needed to
understand.
extend the show
They
for
were
30
trying to
minutes.
stretch it a little bit.
They were, and so what was originally an hour, a 30-minute show ended up becoming an hour, and so the 4th season is sometimes criticized with being a little bit too long, and the episode's not that great. There are 1 or 2 episodes within season 4 that I enjoy, and I asked you to bring your top 5
Yes, I
episodes.
did.
So one of my top 5 episodes is actually from season 4,
Yeah.
and so we're going to explore a little bit about the Cold War and what was happening at the
Yes,
time. So
that
can you tell
affected
us a little bit about the Cold War, John, and how this show touched on some of those things? And then I actually delved a little deeper into some research, and I have an article here that I want to share with you. But go ahead, John.
Oh, yeah. Well, during the Cold War, it was different from World War II because it was the battle, but this was a fight between the Russians, okay? And we were just sort of dealing with the threat of communism coming across
Yes.
from to the United States, and so everybody was fearful of that. Of course, that led to all of the blacklisting in Hollywood later on, and there was this fear of the Russians just taking over the world and through the communism and so forth. That's why, and of course, that influenced Sterling's writing because it was just so complicated. Some of the stuff the stories that he explored and the episodes explored were in that subject too. And so he was concerned about the future, and he was concerned about the threat of communism and how sort of like those episodes where we were doing Maple Street, that they were Congress going to come like the aliens did and take over and everything, and secretly, and they were using messages, and they were using the lights, and they were controlling everything. And
John, you ruined it for me, man. I was going to talk about that. I was going to talk about that episode. But go ahead, continue.
Go ahead. Okay.
Continue. I was going to talk about the monsters that do on Maple Street.
You can explore it too. It's okay.
Nah, it's all good. It's all good because that's actually on my list of favorite episodes. But and I want to touch on that episode because that's a great episode. And a lot of the topics that we're going to talk about, you beat me to the punch. But that's awesome. There is. But no, thank you so much, John. I appreciate that because one day you and I just started talking about television and all these different shows, and we've spoken at length at some of the shows that I didn't watch, and we've talked about the A-Team, we talked about Knight Rider, some of those different shows from the 80s.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
And I just didn't watch them, but somehow we connected when we started talking about the Twilight Zone. I was like, I watched every episode, and so have I. And that's what happened to me, John, is that I started binge watching the Twilight Zone when other people were binge watching Breaking Bad, when other people were binge watching Yellowstone. I was binge watching the Twilight Zone. And the reason why, John, was because I wanted to watch every episode so that I can go back and listen to every single episode of this podcast from the Twilight Zone. That's how I that's how much I enjoy that that show, that podcast. And so if you're interested in that podcast, it is called The Twilight Zone, and it's already done its run. They went through all episodes of The Twilight Zone and the movie. They covered the movie and so forth. But I've listened to every single episode of that podcast maybe 2 or 3 times. In fact, yesterday I was listening to it on my drive home. So it's a wonderful podcast. It's got to get me into the mood of this for this radio show. But what I liked about the show is that you see very young actors and actresses getting their start, right?
Yes, they did. It was the springboard for all of that. And like I said, there's so many I could name. We've seen, you probably know the list. You know what I'm going to refer to. Telly Savalas, of course.
Oh, yes.
Living Doll. He was in Living Doll. He went on to do Kojak, of course. Jack Klugman, he did A Praise of Pip. That's a pretty famous one. I do remember seeing that. He went on to do Quincy. William Shatner, Nightmare on 20,000 Feet. Who could forget that?
Yes, that is a classic.
Classic, got into
a young William Shatner also.
William Shatner, he got to do that. Of course, they got into Star Trek. That's fame from that. Robert Redford, that one Nothing in the Dark to Barefoot in the Park. And then
Nice
to
one,
be
John.
the director himself, So
Robert Redford, a very young Robert Redford, a very good-looking Robert Redford, and one of the things that I learned from this podcast, they were covering that episode, was that the actress herself, I don't remember her name, but she said he may not have been the best actor, but he was the best looking actor. And you see a very young Robert Redford, and he is so handsome. He is so good looking, and I could see where that woman that wanted him as an actor on that particular episode.
Well, he was a very handsome fellow, and he in his time, I'm sure he had a lot of admirers in his day. And still to this day today.
And so Leonard Nimoy also appeared in one of those, who famously became Spock.
Became with Spock in that. And interesting enough, it was a springboard for directors too. Earl Hamner Jr., who was an actor and a director, directed You Drive. The episode with the car that had like kind of a life to it.
A mind of its own.
Mind of its own. It went on to the Waltons. He opened, so Rod Serling was generous in that regard to give both actors and directors a shot at something. And Peter Falk.
Peter Falk, that's right. He came into the Mirror.
And then went on to do Columbo. And, of course, I don't forget the ladies, Julie Newmar.
Oh, my goodness,
Julie
Newmar.
Of Cliffordville. I remember that with the horns.
She was a devil in the character.
Literally was the devil of that travel agency.
Yes, and she went on to do the Catwoman in the original
Batman series.
Yeah, with Adam West. And there's actually a movie dedicated to, not dedicated, but I think in her honor, to oh my goodness, I have to come back after the break after I looked that up, but it's with Patrick Swayze and Wesley Snipes, something to, so I have to get back to you. I kind of botched that one, but we'll get back to that one. There are 156 episodes of The Twilight Zone, 156 episodes respectively of The Twilight Zone, and I have watched every single one. I've watched the movie, and I've listened to the podcast, The Twilight Zone. So I've invested a lot of time into the Twilight Zone. And John, because we're at the University Library on the Bronzeville campus, and a shout out to all my colleagues and the staff at both libraries. Wonderful staff. As we're going into midterms right now, and into the beginning of the research process of your papers as students, one of the things that we want to let you know is that as a library, we're there for you, and we're there to support you, and we're there to advance your research. So thank you so much for investing into what we have to offer you at the library, and hopefully we'll see you there. So yes, what I wanted to mention was that the 5th season ended up going back to a 30-minute format. So I know I talked about that, and I neglected to mention this part. So season 1, 2, and 3 was was 30 minutes, and then season 4 was an hour, and then season 5, which was the final season in 1964, went back to a 30-minute format, and it seemed to work. There's some classic episodes in season 5. So yeah, these actors were given an opportunity. Directors, another director, Richard Donner, famous director.
Yeah,
he did a couple of episodes of The Twilight Zone.
Yes, he did.
He did, and he went on to do Superman,
of course,
The Goonies, Omen,
the Omen.
and so like you say, Rod Serling was providing opportunities for these young
generous
actors.
opportunities for them to get their start in a career and give them those possibilities and give them those opportunities. And I think it's wonderful.
So we're going to take a bit of a break because John and I could continue talking without any music breaks, but we are going to take a little bit of a music break. And so thank you so much again for joining us for Library Talk and everything else here on Vaquero Radio, the Valley's student station. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us back here at Library Talk and everything else. Hopefully you're enjoying the show. I told you from the beginning that we're going to geek out and we're going to nerd out. So that's what this show is about today. So you listened to Shakira, one of our favorite artists here at Vaquero Radio. So I talked about the research question being in regards to the themes of morality and human nature and the fears of society. And I know, John, you talked about, and I wanted to talk about this too, which is great that we kind of got that together, about one of my favorite episodes, which is The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, which explores, you talked about it, and I'll set it up for those of you who haven't seen it. It's this idyllic American city, right, John? And it's a Saturday afternoon, and it seems like the whole neighborhood is out doing something, washing cars. The kids are playing ball and so forth. And they see a streak of light, which ultimately, like you said, is a UFO. And then what happens is, but they don't know at the time, but what happens is that they, as neighbors, one of the children in the neighborhood convinces everybody that these aliens have landed on Earth, right?
That's right.
And he convinces this whole community that my neighbor could be an alien, he can be an alien. And what does that speak of, though? And so what ends up happening is that you have this community that is destroying themselves because of the paranoia, right?
That's the paranoia. Well, it's sort of like he explores. Serling was trying to explore what the paranoia, if aliens did come to our planet. Let's just put on that, and what would happen? He kind of went through their mind. Where would it go? How would they do it? How they do it so cleverly and villainously? I think that's another part of it. Because, of course, they're watching from that screen later on. The aliens going. And it starts to get very paranoiacal-ish when they're saying, okay, guys, this is how you do it, okay?
Yes.
Doing this and that. Its own sounds almost diabolical. Yeah. In a sense, so.
And if you want to look a little deeper, you can also say that it is a mirror into what was happening at the time. That, and I'll give you an example. This is an all-American neighborhood, right? And they start blaming each other that they are aliens. But if you look a little deeper, what was happening? We were accusing our neighbors of being communists. Right. We were accusing people that we knew that were not like us of being different. And I mean, this is the example. You're in a neighborhood, and everybody in the neighborhood put up an American flag, but you were the only ones that didn't. Well, what happened? What were they thinking? Oh, well, you're a communist because you're not supporting the United States. Exactly. And so the way I look at that episode is, yes, it is about aliens, and it is about this what would they do if it did turn into the aliens attacking, but you can go deeper as well, right? And look at it as, you know what, this was a reflection of what was happening with the Cold War and communism.
Yes, oh, sure. Thank you for that. Well, it's elaborate on just real quick. He was like, okay, you're thinking on another level. Could this possibly, you could go, okay, we're talking about alien stuff, but it also could be about the communist thing. And both in Hollywood and in real life, people were blaming people. And if you got blacklisted, like I think Lloyd Bridges ended up, unfortunately, on that list. It took him years to recover. Dalton Trumbo, same thing. I think he wrote Johnny Got His Gun, same thing. He was blacklisted too. It was bad. Now, for actors, directors at that time, and as well as people, just in general, just in America, saying like, are you a communist?
Yes.
Doing this stuff. And it hurt a lot of people. And you would think, hey, this is my neighbor. This is my friend. This is a guy I've known all my life. And then all of a sudden you think this guy's a communist. I think that when you explore those kind of issues, I guess Serling was sensitive to it because maybe this is what's happening.
So what I did was utilizing the UTRGV University Library's resources. Plug. I went and did some research, and I found a wonderful article. This is from Science Fiction, Film and Television, Volume 7, Issue Number 1, dated April 2014 by Eric Mortensen. And the title of the article is A Journey into the Shadows, The Twilight Zone's Visual Critique of the Cold War. And so let me read a little bit of what this article is about. The Cold War was a time of strict binaries where the symbolic struggle between forces of light and the forces of darkness played out in both public rhetoric and popular culture. Rod Serling's The Twilight Zone, again from 1959 to 64, drew on this imagery to create a television show that explored the shaded areas where light and dark met. In order to discuss such delicate matters such as nuclear anxiety, that's another topic that's explored, right?
Yes.
Nuclear anxiety, racial tensions, and suburban conformity, Serling asked viewers to journey into what was termed the land of shadows, where normal rules and expectations broke down. In the Twilight Zone, shadows became the site of the cultural critique that utilized these liminal spaces of ambiguity to challenge the dualistic thinking of the times. Although critics have discussed the show's thematic content, little attention has been paid to the Twilight Zone's visual feel, which is a striking omission given to the show's title. The Twilight Zone was a provocative series where thematic content and innovative visual styles were mutually reinforced. Serling and his co-authors scripted often strange, twisting tales that caught viewers off guard, forcing them to rethink commonly held beliefs. But the visual feel of the majority of the episodes, populated by shadow, worked in tandem with the show's content to create a world where common assumptions of the Cold War were integrated and oftentimes overturned. And that's what you have in this show. You have this show about aliens. You have this show about fantastical creatures. You have this show that looks at all sorts of themes, but it explored through this imagery and this writing that is very unique. And I mentioned at the beginning, not every episode is a winner. You know, not every episode is considered classic, because there's some comedy episodes that just do not work.
Didn't work.
And again, if you're interested in it, by all means, watch every single episode. And if you're interested, I can't get enough of talking about this, my favorite podcast, The Twilight Pod. But, you know, it is a very interesting show. And I know what a lot of people are turned off by is the fact that it is in black and white. You know, and that, I'm not going to lie, that was one of the things that I'm like, well, this show is in black and white, you know. But once you get past that, you have a very deep show that at the surface seems silly and seems, you know, fantastical with aliens and, you know, and Martians and all these different things. But at second glance can be a little deep.
Yes, it can. Well, it really was so well. And like that's what attracted me to them, too, because it looks black and white. I was kind of taken aback by that because, okay, it's a black and white. But I got past that and I said, well, no, it's not just about what it looks like. It's just the content of it, the way he wrote it, the storytelling, the plot twists. Like, for example, like in, like, say, The Midnight Sun, you know, or you see the real Martian, Please Stand Up, you know. It was surprising, shocking, kind of used kind of old-fashioned. Again, the technology wasn't the best, but I got over that. I said, like, oh, the plot twists are fascinating.
I think that's what intrigues a lot of people. When they think about the Twilight Zone, I think they think that twist, that O. Henry twist, right?
Right.
I think that's what's going to happen. That's what kind of catches your attention. but it's not always the case. There are some episodes that there's no twist,
Yeah, that's right.
But when we think about the Twilight Zone, it's like, oh, it's it's a cookbook. I'll give that example
Yeah, okay,
from
okay,
To
okay.
Serve Man. Sorry if I ruined it for you if you were watching it this afternoon, but this is just a review of the episodes, and it is a product of its time. There's an episode, and you and I discussed this, that takes place in 1997. And again, this show was from 1959 to 64. So in 1997, according to the episode, we're already living in space and we're exploring planets beyond our galaxy.
Yeah.
And again, they took it as, we don't really know. I mean, this, the space race was going to start. I mean, Russia again against the United States. In 1969, the United States lands on the moon. And, but in the Twilight Zone, we were already beyond the moon. We were already in other galaxies and exploring, those themes even beyond our world, because there are episodes where everyone is just like us, or people are the same all over the place. Something to that, should have gotten my notes a little better there, but there's an episode where they explore a different planet and come to find out that those people from that planet, are the same as us here.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
they're racists, they are discriminatory, and so yeah, it was such a powerful show that I hope that if you're listening to this and you have an interest in what we're talking about and the show, it's available on Amazon Prime.
Yes.
And so you can go through there. And I watched it through Netflix when Netflix still had it on, but now it's available through Prime. And take a chance, take a look at it. John and I are going to cover our top 5 episodes with an audible mention. And maybe you can start with some of these. Again, these are our favorites. But just try an episode and don't let it discourage you when you find an episode, and I'll tell you which is considered the worst episode of the series, The Bard. Bud does have a very young Burt Reynolds in there.
Yes,
that is a draw to that one, right?
Exactly,
Yeah,
absolutely.
but The Bard is considered the worst episode, so don't start with that one because it might turn you off or not want to watch the show. So I want to shift to something else, John, because this is just such a wonderful conversation. But I wanted to shift to something else because I was curious. I was curious about what people thought about the show. I was curious about what today's youth perhaps thinks about the show and people our age. And again, this is before their time, but I was curious as to what they had to say. So let me go over, and I'm not going to mention names of who I asked or anything, but these are direct quotes from them. Okay, these are direct quotes from them. And the quotes go like this. So I asked this person, what do you know about the Twilight Zone? And they said, I don't know anything about it. That was their response.
just don't know anything about. Okay.
So
That's
flat
okay.
out, didn't know anything about it.
Complete
And
totally.
so,
That's
yeah,
okay.
nothing.
That's okay.
Okay, so another person, what do you know about the Twilight Zone? I have heard of it, but have never seen it.
Okay.
Okay,
All right.
same question. I only know the music.
The music.
And the music is classic also.
Yes,
You
it
hear
is.
that little
Absolutely,
sound,
yeah.
that little noise. I mean, little noise, my goodness.
Noise.
The music that just, and the first couple of bars, and that
Oh, yes.
it's the Twilight Zone, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so another quote. A classic series that the youth of today needs to watch. Okay, that's
I
good.
think that's good.
And again, for historical purposes,
I think
or
it
maybe
does.
to
I think
touch
that
some
would
of
be
the
good.
topics.
They could touch those topics and scroll on. Sure.
Another response. It's in black and white, so no thanks.
No, thank.
so this is
Well,
what they
you
said.
know, just for the not that I want to get my personal thing into it. I mean, you can watch whatever you want, black and white. I love Route 66. That's one of my favorite shows, and it's all in what? Black and white. I don't think it ever went to color. But the show was so interesting. Todd was their car, and all the people they met through America as they were trying to find themselves in America. I thought it was fun. So, I mean, I guess it's the eye is in the beholder, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. If you like black and white, if you can live with it, without it, it's fine. Let's go.
John, you just mentioned an episode.
Uh,
Using the Eye of the Beholder. That's an
Oh,
episode
thanks.
as well.
See how clever I worked that in?
That's right. I don't know if that was scripted, but okay. Another quote is the best show to start psychological thrillers. So there are some episodes that are a little
Well, it does
Yeah, a little
explore the cycle.
creepy,
It's a little
freaky,
creepy,
yes.
unusual. You know, that Nightmare 20,000 Feet was one, and I was looking at some that asked, well, actually, it influenced a lot of these movies. I'm going to say one says Santa Clarita Diet and Love, Death, and Robots. I think that's one of the modern ones today. It was influenced by these psychological themes they explored back then.
Yes.
See, it explored it, and it kind of carried into now.
And John, not only that, but there are so many episodes that influenced young movie makers. The episode, you know, my goodness, I'm drawing a blank here because I'm trying to read this last quote. But Real Steel, that became a movie. You know, that became a movie. Little Girl Lost became became the basis of Poltergeist by Steven Spielberg.
Right.
You know, Stephen King was influenced by this, the writer. So
And
yeah,
just to
so
kind of
this
add on to it, just a Nightmare, like say Nightmare film screen parodies based on those ones that's during the career, like Nightmare on Elm Street.
yes, that's right.
The Truman Show. is
So
another
all of that, yes.
Sixth Sense. You know, those are three big ones. I think heavily influenced by it.
Let me read another quote here, and this is a little lengthy, but it's a great quote nonetheless. And thank you everybody for sharing these quotes. I went out and actually, as they say, hit the pavement and asked. So looking back through the internet at the images of the Twilight Zone, I was stunned by the predominantly male protagonists. After digging a bit deeper, I found a blog that states that out of the 156 episodes, 22 featured women protagonists. Shocking. Even if it is not accurate, all you have to do is browse to see the disparity. Disparity. The Twilight Zone is a product of its time, and it is a product of its time.
It is.
You know, it is
During that era. Captures
yes.
that era well, and it's another way that one critic noted about Serling. This is really wonderful, generous to him. He was a wondrous Aesop of sorts involved with
That's
the
right.
golden age of television, and
That's right.
That's a great way to honor him because he was so ahead of his time. And people are surprised you find out he even contributed to the screenplay to the Planet of the Apes. He
That's
kept
right.
exploring.
You're right.
Long after it was done, he just said, "I want to keep going on this thing, on this tread," and did that.
And after the Twilight Zone was over, I think he did another series called Night Gallery.
Yes, Night Gallery is very
which
popular.
wasn't as popular as the Twilight Zone.
Popular, but I hear the episodes where I haven't seen all the episodes myself, but I hear they're very fascinating too.
Yes. So we're coming to the conclusion of our show. Oh my goodness, we can continue talking about this for
Rage.
for a little bit longer, but we do have to start ending our show. But John, your top 5 episodes of the Twilight Zone. Again, no spoilers, but if you want to get a little bit of what the episode is about, so your top 5, John, and then I'll do my top 5.
I'll quickly go through. Okay, kind of a stopwatch. Okay, this was with Richard Erdman. He explores. He's given a fascinating little toy of a stopwatch that has incredible supernatural powers. Then he has still too much fun with that toy, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Penny for your thoughts, Dick York.
That's right, another one,
ends
Dick
with,
York.
And for that one, again, no spoilers. Let's just say that it just takes one penny to open up the door to an amazing gift from above.
Dick York starred in that one. He came out in another episode as well.
Yeah, he did. He did come out in another episode. I wish I could get the name off the top of the bat. Walking Distance is a pretty good one also.
Yes, Walking Distance is on a lot of lists of top episodes of the Twilight Zone.
He apparently explored a lot of that. Again, no spoilers, but he liked to go back to being a child, or what it was like to be a child and start over. He seemed to explore that theme as well. That's one thing about Walking Distance. The Odyssey of Flight 33, that's the 4th one. To me, was a combination of both the special effects and, again, the time travel end of it. He explored this of how it could possibly affect the future or, again, your outcome. And, of course, the Midnight Sun, that'll clear out the top 5, where I think that's the one where the sun becomes just too hot. And it's really just a lady experiencing something that's really not there. Okay, that'll do it.
And your honorable mention, John?
My honorable mention, Short Drink from a Certain Fountain.
Oh, okay, that's an interesting one.
One where he kind of, let's just say, taking youth a little too far.
Yes. So my top 5, in no particular order, Time Enough at Last with Burgess Meredith.
Of
that
course,
is a
yes.
classic episode.
Yes,
that is a classic. And
totally.
you probably, once you start watching it, you're going to know what the ending is. If you have never seen any episode of The Twilight Zone, I highly recommend Time Enough at Last. That is the very first episode I ever watched.
Yes, I did. I was attracted by it too.
It is such an
so
amazing
fascinating.
episode. So if you want to start with a classic, if you want to start with a really great episode,
Definitely start with that
Time
one.
Enough at
Definitely
Last.
start with
Highly
that one.
recommended.
Yeah, of course.
We talked about The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, and that's one of
Yep.
my favorite as well.
Classic.
And I can watch that over and over again, even though I know how the twist is going to end
Of
and
course.
how it's going to go. The Living Doll with the very young Telly Savalas. I really like
yes,
that.
that was nice.
And that one explores, this doll that he's the only one that hears, and you're wondering, is it all in his mind? Is it real?
Yes,
So that's a
those
wonderful
questions start to
episode.
pop
Yeah.
up.
And again, the ending is great in that one too. And again, John, the classic, a young William Shatner, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. That is another
It's
classic
It's just
episode.
standing right there. Everybody who knows it, seen it. But if you
Yes.
haven't, I'm not going to spoil it.
If you have not seen it, highly recommended.
Of course.
And I talked about the fourth season being as the season that kind of, it was kind of the throwaway
Yeah,
season.
they say it was throwaway, but there were a few.
And one of the episodes that I really enjoy, and it made my top 5, is On Thursday We Leave for Home.
Yes.
On
very
Thursday We
well.
Leave for Home.
Mhm,
And that
mhm.
explores a God complex.
Yes. of
So,
course,
although
of course.
season 4 is an hour long,
Mhm, mhm.
it is a wonderful episode, and it's just a great episode. It takes place years from now on another planet, and it is just a great episode
Very
from season
thoughtful, very
4.
thoughtful.
Yeah. And an honorable mention for me is Will the Real Martian Please Stand Up?
Okay,
And
yeah,
you
that's-
probably, if you do a search on any internet image search and you type in The Twilight Zone, more than likely the image of this episode is going to come up. No
yeah.
spoilers, but once you start watching the episode, you're going to know
Mhm.
that the twist ending because you've seen this in the
Where it
cultural.
goes to, right?
Yes, you've seen it. So that's my honorable mention. Wonderful episodes, both. John, thank you so much for sharing your top 5 and your honorable mention. And my top 5 are, again, Time Enough at Last, Monsters Due on Maple Street, The Living Doll, On Thursday We Leave for Home, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, and Will the Real Martian Stand Up? And just please repeat them, John, for in case anybody
of course, I was
is kind of
gonna-
curious
yeah,
about what your
mine was
episodes were again.
Kind of a stopwatch. Penny for Your Thoughts, Walking Distance, The Odyssey of Flight 33, and The Midnight Sun.
Odyssey of Flight 33 is a great episode as well.
Mm.
I didn't have it on my list, but that is a wonderful episode. So,
Fantastic.
so as we're wrapping up, and we really do thank you again for the opportunity to allow us to spend your Thursday morning with you. Please follow along to all the other shows that are also on Vaquero Radio. We want to encourage anybody that's interested in radio. We are going through radio days. We're celebrating radio days here at UTRGV. And with that, if anybody's interested in their own show or wants to know more about our show, just follow up. Ultimately, all episodes of everybody's show will be uploaded to the Vaquero Radio the YouTube channel. So hopefully you have a chance if you missed an episode or you're interested in what some of the other shows are about, you can go to the YouTube page and the YouTube channel for Vaquero Radio. So we've reached our ending here, John. Thank you so very much. Honestly,
my
again,
pleasure, my friend.
you're
Thank you for the
welcome.
invite.
You're welcome anytime
Oh, wow.
to talk about another topic.
Thank you, kind sir. I
the-
appreciate that. Thank you.
So we will end the show with Shakira again, one of our favorites here at Vaquero Radio, and we want to wish everybody, a wonderful weekend. Take care. Supposedly, it's supposed to rain this weekend here in the Rio Grande Valley. So if it is, and it does, just take care. All right. So until next time, I should have another guest next week. Won't tell you. We'll keep you in suspense for what next week's episode will be. But again, thank you so very much for joining us here on Vaquero Radio and the Library Talk and Everything Else show. So hasta luego. Bye-bye.